One of the most iconic German tanks of the Second World War was the Panther. Some consider it one of the greatest vehicles in military history, and it had a number of advantages over its rival German vehicle, the Tiger. The Panther had better gun penetration and was lighter and faster than the Tiger, and it could cross tough terrain better. It also had brilliant firepower and was a lot cheaper to create and produce than the Tiger. But today there are very few of these tanks that saw action during World War II around. There are a few in working order or inside of museums today, but Panther tanks command a price of well over £10 million if they are discovered in good order. They are amongst the most valuable vehicles of World War II, but recently, in a river in Poland, there was an incredibly rare Panther salvaged from the riverbed. But what was discovered was remarkable, as this was not just any Panther tank. For new history videos every 2 days, make sure to click subscribe. For years there were stories about lost German tanks inside of a Polish river, the Sazana Nida. The Germans and Wehrmacht were, it's believed, said to have lost many of their best vehicles as they desperately tried to retreat from the Soviet Red Army, who were advancing at breakneck speed towards them. There were inside of the river 2 Panther tanks pulled from the river in 1990 and 2003, but there was always a belief that there was one tank left to find. An old man who lived nearby had during the war seen the German vehicle and tanks sink in the river. He informed experts that a German tank, what he believed was a Panther without a turret, had sank at the bottom of the river, and he showed a rough guess as to where the vehicle was. Investigations were then carried out on the river, and there was an area of interest looked for. The area was significant during the Second World War, as there were many German tanks stationed here during the final days of the conflict, and specifically the German 16th Armoured Division was awaiting the Soviets and trying to dig in. But by January 1945, the Germans found themselves surrounded, and in a rush to retreat, they tried to cross the Sazana Nida River, and there was little time to find a bridge. It was claimed that Soviet engineering troops reported that the ice on Sazana Nida allowed only lighter vehicles to cross. It was not suitable for tanks. So the Germans, in their haste to retreat, took a number of tanks across the icy river, but of course World War II tanks were very heavy, and with this they fell into the river and then sank. This is why there has been more than one Panther tank discovered in the river. However, what was discovered when the 2023 Panther was lifted from the depths was remarkable, and also slightly unexpected. As the vehicle was lifted from the water, it was clear they were not dealing with a normal Panther tank, and it soon became clear that this was a Bergepanther, a very rare variant of the Panther. The Bergepanther was an armoured recovery vehicle used by the Wehrmacht during World War II. The concept for the Bergepanther came around in 1943 due to issues that heavy and medium tanks were having with being recovered. As they were so heavy, they became bogged down and stuck in rough terrain, and it was rare for the German army to recover vehicles such as the Tiger or Panther because of their size. It was also not possible to tow a Tiger or Panther with another one of these vehicles, as there was a greater fear that if the enemy attacked and took both of the tanks, this would then be too much of a loss. In total there were 339 Bergpanthers produced, with the intention to rescue heavier German vehicles and then recover them. The hull of the vehicle was very similar to that of a Panther tank, virtually identical, and there was a crew of at least 3 soldiers, and 2 soldiers who would operate the recovery devices. It was in its own way rather reliable, and it did not have a huge heavy turret on top, weighing it down, and even the heaviest Tiger I tanks could actually be recovered by a Bergepanther with just a winch. There was an onboard machine gun used for defence and for protection of the recovery crew. The tank had sufficient armour all around to shield it from specific attacks from the enemy, but in late 1944 it was known that there were 5 Bergpanthers stationed in the area of the river where the tank was later discovered. This Bergpanther was the tank that the old man had mentioned was without a turret, and he mentioned that this was probably a Panther. The wreck when it was pulled out of the lake was heavily rusted, but you could see it was a Panther tank. It had the classic sloped armour at the front and the large interleaving road wheels. The track was also in relatively good condition, and the hatches at the front were open when it was lifted from the depths. So what had happened with the Bergpanther was that the tank had either purposely driven into or across a frozen lake to prevent it falling into the hands of the Soviets, or the German crews had foolishly driven it across an icy river in a quick attempt to try and evade capture at the hands of the Red Army. The Bergpanther, despite not having a turret, was still very heavy, weighing 43 tons, and the desperate attempt to cross the Sazan-Nida River led to the tank sinking into the river and then being lost for 80 years. It's probable that the crew managed to escape relatively easy as well, and it's not documented if this wreck was a war grave or not. If there were bodies inside the tank at the time, they could have even possibly been preserved due to the state of the oxygen levels in the river. When the tank was pulled from the river, there were also many other artefacts found, dating back to the Second World War. The turret of a Panther was found, but it did not belong to the Bergepanther vehicle, but probably one of the earlier Panthers that were lifted from the river, and it is hoped that this could be reunited with one of the hulls. There was also a Stug 3 assault gun discovered on the riverbed, and this was also lifted, and also an armoured tracked vehicle, and many other parts. What was discovered was the desperate panic of a German retreat trying to escape the enemy, and it was clear that many of the vehicles had been driven into the water to try and cross the river, but they were all too heavy for the ice. That's one hypothesis anyway. Another is that after being surrounded, the German forces willingly sank the vehicles in the river to avoid them falling into the hands of the Red Army. They did not want their prized weapons falling into enemy hands and then being used against them, so they may have purposely plunged them into the Polish River. The Bergpanther discovered at the bottom of the river today is undergoing cleaning, restoration and cataloguing, and researchers are trying their best to find out more about the specific group that it was part of. There is also a search for the crew who were on board and their names, but if the tank is restored to even static condition, the Bergpanther could attract a huge sum of money. A few years ago, a Panther sold for 15 million euros in Germany, but the Bergpanther is incredibly rare and could even command a greater fee should it be restored properly and be fitted out with parts that it is missing, for example an authentic machine gun. There were even visible traces of the Zimmerit paste that was coated and applied onto German tanks to avoid them being hit with Soviet sticky bombs or anti-tank grenades. Without doubt, the Bergpanther tank found at the bottom of the Polish River is one of the greatest discoveries of the past few decades with regards to Second World War military vehicles. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.